Hello folks, Wolf Ninja here bringing you another nerdy video. I'm decided to make this video real quick because I just saw some very good news on Facebook from Wizards of the Coast, and that is a new D&D book coming out. It is Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and from what I've seen, what Wizards said this book is going to include, they literally mean everything. It's going to have new subclasses. It's going to have expanded subclasses, even for the Artificer. It's going to have now expanded stuff for having groups have patron, like a joint background type thing. We're also getting what's it called, sort of like new options for subclasses. It seems that Wizards of the Coast are finally starting to move forward with all the content that they released in terms of the UA. I'm not sure if folks remember, but they did release several UAs recently in the past. One was expanding subclass options, which, for example, allowed certain classes to swap out spells, like the spellcaster ones. I believe it was the druid and one other class that really got this type of treatment, which was they allowed them to be able to swap spells. It was during a long rest. No, sorry, it wasn't spells plural. They allowed them to swap out one spell per long rest, keeping the focus on that ability, that unique ability to swap out your entire prepared spell list to the cleric, druid, and paladin, which again is great. I do not remember the full expanded options in each one. This is also possibly the reveal of the updated Ranger. Now, Wizards of the Coast have constantly said it since the success of, well, it's one of their biggest successes, was the Ranger revised for 5e. Now, everyone knows that the Ranger in 5th edition has a lot of problems, particularly when it comes to the Beast Conclave. The one of the more, it's in the past, apparently it was one of the more popular playstyles of playing the Ranger, having an animal companion. It's one of the more iconic ones, but unfortunately, due to certain circumstances, it's the weak in terms of popularity has significantly dropped, just because as much as people like it, later down along the line, it is not really playable. One of the best examples, now in my opinion, one of the best examples of this was if you look to Critical Role, Vaxalia. Her, now again, these are voice actors who play in D&D, and they put more of an emphasis on the role playing they do than they do mechanically wise. But even in that case, look at how Vaxalia utilized herself as a ranger. She utilized Hunter's Mark a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, she utilized a lot of the ranger spells and such a lot. But at the end of the day, even though her archetype was supposedly the Beast Conclave, she hardly ever used Trinket. Trinket was generally always kept somewhere else, or eventually kept in the locket. And as like it was such such a shame, and I imagine that is just because at the end of the day, it became more and more evidence that it would be better if Axalia used her action to do something else and to deal damage than it was to ever actually utilize her bear. They like and this and like don't get me wrong, I love the fact that they still roleplayed the idea of with Trinket around. It was really fun. It was entertaining to watch. But at the end of the day, when it came down to combat, Trinket was basically non-existent. And that was just due to the fact that the Beast Conclave Ranger was so weak and such. Now, mind you, the revised Ranger came out like a year or so ago. They had plenty of opportunity to re-release it. They had Xanathar's Guide, they had Eberron, they had Ravnica, they had so many books where they could have introduced the new Ranger, but they haven't. Now, mind you, that is the Ranger was completely redone, so I can understand why we haven't really seen it in some of those books, because those books focused on adding new subclasses and such. There hasn't really been a book that really changed things mechanically wise for classes. And because one of the big points for Tash's Cauldron of Everything is expanded subclass options and such, I feel like this is the best book. This is probably a book we're going to get the revised Ranger added. Especially even the fact that they're including the Artificer, which is in not in the core handbook. It's in a completely different book. Now, what was also mentioned is new spells. So we're going to get plenty of new spells. Because again, like Tasha, if the name sounds familiar, that is because there's a famous spell in D&D. Most often I've seen used with bards, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which people tend to overlook a bit, but like I've seen it in combat. It can be really handy when you actually manage to pull it off. So, so we're going to get plenty of new spells similar to now, luckily enough, they mentioned this because there is one book where they had the opportunity to add new spells, but they didn't utilize it, and that was Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Now, Mordenkainen is another famous magic user from the world of D&D. Now, mind you, though, the book does say Tome of Foes, so therefore, like, you had to give a bit of leeway with that book, like the why they didn't have any new spells, because it's Tome of Foes. So it's just like a account of Mordenkainen's experience with certain races and what he knew and discovered about races. There's like I said, there's the group patron. That was another. That was introduced. That was a concept that was introduced in Eberron. Unfortunately, the way it's written, it's more exclusive of Eberron. I've seen DMs have their own. Hold on, have a hair in my mouth. There we go. So yeah, I've seen DMs and such, do group patrons. Like when they get during a session 0, they get their group together and be like, okay, these are all being hired by this one person and so forth. So having a group patron is pretty standard in the sense of at least starting an adventure. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that ends up. In Eberron, it was very fun to read. Like everyone having been part of the same organization. Technically, it's along the similar lines of Ravnica. So we might see more of that. Because the thing is, though, with the Ravnica one, you could all be part of the same guild, and that'll be your technically group patron, but you're all having the same background. So, at least in this terminology, you can all have different backgrounds, but then you all have the same person who supports you. There's also going to be some new additions for Session Zeros. Now, normally, Session Zero is something that players and DMs tend to do nowadays, regardless. But it's interesting that there's now going to be like a set of like things for Session Zero. We never really got that. The most we get with in terms of like official stuff for Session Zero was generally third party stuff. The closest we got was in hold on one sec, folks. No, quiet down. The closest we got to anything like involved in Session Zeros officially was in Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. And in that, it was mostly just due to for individual characters, like let's see what else was there. So I'm not sure if I can tab off of this recording. And as you can see, I'm downstairs in my kitchen, so I can't really click onto Google. Let's see. I'm gonna try it, folks. There might be a part 2 to this video if it goes wrong.